Hey there everybody, Joe here, and I've got a new demo for you. Now this is my favorite tree in Dead Horse Point State Park near Moab, Utah, and it just isn't working obviously, but even though the exposure is pretty good, now I was trying to protect these highlights along the distant canyon, and you can see from the histogram that I was a little conservative. I made it a little too dark. And unfortunately, the tree, because it's somewhat backlit, went really dim and all the color's gone. Now, this is really a shame because this is not what it looked like even to my eyes, and our cameras don't do a great job with backlit stuff. For example, I'll show you the point. There's the tree. That's actually how big it is. And you get to see that you have to get down pretty low, and I got down even lower than this. I literally had my head on the rocks because I wanted to have the tree completely above the canyon. And we don't have any clouds today, but that's okay. It's still going to work. Oh, we might add clouds as well. But let's fix the thing so that it actually really looked the way it looked to my eyes. So let's start out with the basics. What are the problems? Well, obviously, the shadows are way too dark. So let's open up the shadows. Well, that looks better already. Now, again, the color is missing. The light is just bad. Let's just add some vibrance to this. Let's add some texture and some clarity. The distant canyon is a little bit hazy, so we'll fix that with dehaze separately because the tree is fine. But we need to add some vibrance, which affects the cooler colors like blues and greens. So you see our skies coming back. And saturation will affect the rest of the image to bring back some of the red in the stone. And we really lost a lot of color because this stone is really more like about this. Now, you could look at it and say, well, you know, that's all you want to do to it. Oh, but there's so much more we can do. Let's do some more work with the foreground. And there's an interesting way we can now do this in the latest version of Lightroom, and that's come up to our masking panel and choose Select Sky. And it's going to do its magic and select the sky, but we're not after the sky. We're after everything but the sky. And look at that. It did an amazing job of picking out the sky. What we want is the foreground. So if you see these three little dots here and click on there, nope, wrong ones. If you click on the mask itself, see where here it says Sky 1, you can see three little dots. Click on there and you say invert. Well, that's great. Now it's going to give us everything but the sky, and we can do some edits here. So let's bring up the exposure a little bit. Oh, that's looking better because we didn't want to bring up the exposure of the sky, just the foreground. Let's add some dehaze. We'll let the tree get some of the dehaze also. Actually, we're going to need some more, though. So let's subtract from this using a brush. And I'm going to turn off Auto Mask, and I'm going to just subtract the tree itself, because we're going to work on the tree separately. In fact, we're going to try something interesting with the tree as well. Let's just take a look and see. With our overlay, you can hit the O key. And by the way, all the old keyboard shortcuts for Lightroom masking still work. All right, so there we go. We got rid of the tree. Now we're just dealing with the background. All right, so even a little more dehaze. Let's bring that up a little more. That's looking better. And now let's bring up the exposure more, because dehaze does have a tendency to darken things. Great. I'm going to work on this a little bit more. It's still kind of hazy there, and the color is a little bit off. So let's click on Create New Mask and get a brush. I'm going to turn on Auto Mask, and let's get a brush and select the distant canyon, because it is looking a little bit too dark and maybe just a little bit too blue. All right, let's see if we can deal with this. I said it's too blue, so let's push over on the yellow. Well, that looks a lot better. And let's add a little contrast. It'll take away a little bit of the haze. Let's let the shadows get darker. And yeah, I think that's looking pretty good. We don't want to make it the subject. Now, this rock over here in the lower right is still a little bit too dark. So let's click on Create a New Mask with a brush. And let's turn off Auto Mask. Let's just paint some sections. And a good rule of thumb to guide this is actually paint over the spots that are a little bit lighter and leave the darker ones alone. Yes, I just got a little bit sloppy on here, so I'm going to hold down the Alt key As soon as it's done drawing, I'm going to hold down the Alt key, and that'll convert it to a minus. I could have hit subtract up in the menu, but let's just do it the old-fashioned way. It's also faster. And let's bring up the exposure separately for that, and that's looking a lot better. Now I want the midtones up. I'm going to bring the highlights down a little bit. I don't want to get the rocks to get too light. And love it. Okay, now let's work on the tree. We'll hit done on this. So the tree needs some work. Let's get another brush. And again, as I mentioned, if I create a new mask, you see there's all these keyboard shortcuts. And you're going to find yourself using K, M, and Shift M all the time. But we'll just use a brush for now. So what I want to do is select the tree trunk because it's got a little bit gray. So, let's make sure Auto Mask is on. We want that on. And let's get our tree trunk, because this is a spectacular tree. I photograph this tree every time I come to Dead Horse. I just can't get enough of it. In fact, I'll show you another view of it where the tree is part of the background rather than the primary subject. It's still a completely valid interpretation of the scene. It's all about what you want to highlight. And this one, I wanted this one really to be all about the tree. So there's our trunk, most of it anyway. We'll get some up in here, add a little bit into these spots. And now let's add some warmth. I'm going to push the color temperature over to yellow. I'm going to bring up the exposure a little bit. And I'm going to add a little, let's see, is magenta the answer, or do we need to go green? Actually, you might want to take some of the magenta out. So we're going to actually add a little bit of green in there. And look how much better that looks. Now the tree is really separated from the background. Now let's deal with the actual green part of the tree. We need another mask, or again, we can just hit the K key, which will give us a new mask. I'm going to get a nice big brush. Since Auto Mask is on, I can just click in any of the foliage, and it will just grab it and leave the sky alone behind it. Because we need to put some of the green back into here that we have lost. And again, it's backlit. And the thing about your camera is, if you were HDRing, you might be able to recover this. But our eyes HDR automatically. If you just were here and you just looked specifically at the foliage, it would look green to you. But your camera can't do that. It can't make that decision for you. So that's why we have to do this here. All right, so that's a pretty good selection. Maybe got a little bit too much in here. I hold down the Alt key. We'll take this part out on the trunk, so we don't want to make the trunk greener. All right, so now let's add some green. We'll add some green in. I'll add a lot of green in. Let's add a little bit of blue as well. Let's bring up the exposure. And we're going to increase the saturation so that we can actually have some more green. We don't want it to be crazy green, but just realistically. And actually, these plants right here, I was not paying attention to. These things are actually green. I don't know why the color went here. So while I've got my brush settled, or selected rather, I can make these green as well. Got a little bit in here, so let's undo that on the rocks. There we go. And let's hit done. Now, there's a little bit too much on the top. I'm going to hit the R key, which is our cropping tool. I'm going to bring that down a little bit and hit done. Now let's go to effects. I'm going to put a vignette around this. I'll add it all the way. Let's see. Do I want a round vignette like that? I think I want to cut down on the roundness and push it off to the edges a little bit more. So we'll do that, but we'll hit the midpoint. We'll bring that in a little bit from the edge. Then we'll back off on the amount down to 12, 15, something like that. And that's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to create a virtual copy so I can reset it. So watch what happens. I'm going to reset this back to what it was we started with. Let's go full screen with the F key. So there's the raw file that we started with. And here's our image after the edit. Well, that certainly looks a heck of a lot better. Again, the big question is, do we want a sky? As long as we're here, let's do it. So let's come out of here. I happen to have a sky that I actually shot right near here. Actually, I think it might even been the same day. Let's see. Here's my sky. And here's our edit. Let's hit the I key, which will tell us the date. Let's see. That was April 30th, rather. And, oh, no, they were actually two separate, completely different trips, but in the same area. Okay. Well, I do go here a lot, so there we go. So there's our two shots. There's the sky we're going to use. Let's go up to Photo, Edit in Photoshop, but nope, we don't want this. We want Open as Layers in Photoshop so that both of the images we're going to work with are going to end up there. So here we are in Photoshop. You can see over in here the two different layers. Here's our sky, here's our bottom. The files are a little different size, that's okay. Let's hide the sky first, and let's click on this one. So let's go ahead and select our sky. We're going to use the magic wand tool. That's just W, hit that, and I've got it set for 32, and contiguous is turned off because we want the selection to go in between these little nooks and crannies on the tree. So let's click in there, and that did a pretty good job. We've got a little bit of the canyon back here, but that's okay. Let's hold down the Shift key and add down here, and add down here. All right. So that got that. We don't want this part though. So let's get the lasso tool and hold down, that's L, and hold down Alt, which turns it to a minus. Although this step is going to actually end up not being necessary. And I'll show you why in just a minute. Okay, so there's with that. So let's go back to our wand. And I think if I turn on contiguous, that'll keep it from picking up any more foreground. So let's do that. And there, that's an excellent selection for our sky. So let's go to Select, Save Selection, and call it Sky. Hit OK. We'll deselect that, Command or Control D. Let's go get our sky. So M is the marquee tool, or this thing right here. Let's go ahead and select all of our sky. We can go to Edit, Copy, or Command or Control C. Then we can turn this off and deselect it because that sky is now sitting on the clipboard. Let's go back to our original layer, and we need to bring our sky selection back. So go to Load Selection under Select and choose Sky. I'll hit OK, and there it is. Now we're going to go Edit, Paste Special, Paste Into, and that puts our sky there. Now it's in the wrong place, but that's okay, because now we're just going to move it under Edit, Free Transform, or Command or Control T. Let's move it up a bit, and you'll see we'll start to get that old background. We don't want that. We're going to make it a little bit bigger, left and right. And I'm going to stretch it a little bit. And to do that, I'm just going to hold down the Shift key and pull up from the bottom. And actually, I got to pull down the bottom too, because we picked up a little of the background. And hit Enter. Now, if you look at the image without the sky, you can see that as everything got down near the horizon, it started to fade away. And that's what skies do. So we need to do that for this sky as well. Here's our mask. What we need to do is put a gradation from the bottom up, including coming across this grass, that has this fade in. So let's hit the G key, which is gradient. If you haven't done this before, you'll see basics here. The one with the black with the checkerboard means from foreground, because we have black in our foreground down here. Foreground to transparent. I'm going to start right at the horizon, and I'm going to drag up a little bit of an angle so that it does a good job of getting over the grass. And hit Enter. Actually, maybe a little too much. Let's do a little bit less than that. Yeah, maybe I don't need to do quite so much of a gradient. Let's do that again. I'll come up to about there. That looks good. Okay, so now we've got a faded, you can see the sky is now fading in, and it looks much more realistic. So let's get the C key, which is crop. I'm going to just crop up from the bottom. I think the top is good, and let's hit Enter on that. And let's save this and send it back into Lightroom, Command or Control S. And you can see down at the bottom it's saving it, and this will put our image right back into Lightroom. All right, so here's our image back in Lightroom, and as I look at it, I really like it. One thing, however, I think this rock here is a little too saturated. So let's get a brush, which is just the K key, and I've got Auto Mask turned on, and I'm going to take this rock, take a little bit of the saturation out of it. at least particularly in this front part, because it's drawing a little bit too much attention to itself, and we don't want that. So I hold down the Alt key to make this a minus to get the canyon out of there. A little bit of the tree there, and this. I think I want to darken that up as well. So let's bring down the saturation, and I'm going to bring down the highlights a little bit too, just to take away some of the interest. We don't want you looking here. We want you looking at the tree. And again, while I'm at it, I'm going to hit K again, and I'm going to get this grass, or I'm not sure what this stuff. I actually believe this plant here is called Mormon tea. I think somebody told me that when I was out there. So I'm going to make that a little bit greener, take a little bit bluer, and a little bit darker, because I do remember it being a darker plant than that. Okay, let's hit done. Last thing, under detail, let's add a bunch of sharpening, but we don't want to sharpen the sky because that's just going to make it noisy. So we're going to click on masking, hold down the Alt key, click, that makes it completely white. We're going to drag it over to the right so that we're just getting the edges of our subject. And now we've sharpened the bough of the tree and the branches and the foliage, but we're not touching the sky. And then lastly, let's add a little bit of more vignette to this. A little bit of more. Wow. Let's add some more vignette to that. And there we go. Let's take a look at that full screen. And yeah, I think this image benefited by having the new sky, which was shot on a different trip here, but right down the street. And when you compare to what we started with, which was that, an interesting composition, but not a great photograph. And then we took that and really brought it back to life. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you online again soon. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.